In nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti, Amen. Veni Sancti Spiritus, replit votum corde fidelium, et tuia modis in eis in accende. Emite Spiritum Tome creabuntur,
et vagis facem terre.
Oremus Deus qui corde fidelium, Sancti Spiritus, illustratione docuvisti, da nobis in eadem Spiritum recta sapere, et Deus semper consolazione cadere, per Christum Dominum nostrum.
Amen.
Cor Maria Immaculatum,
Ora pro nobis.
Sancte Ioannes,
Ora pro nobis.
Sancte Stephane,
Ora pro
in nomine
nobis.
Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Okay, we continue this important study. Very important study. It's quite an eye-opener for many souls. Theological content suppressed. So we saw the first casualty of the reform of the 1955 Holy Week, of the blessing of palms, was the essential connection between the Passion of Christ and the institution of the Holy Eucharist. So that was broken where?
The 55 changes.
Yeah, but in the Palm Sunday Mass, what precisely did they cut out?
They cut out the institution of the Most Holy Eucharist from the reading of the Gospel.
Right. Yes. And the part where Mary Magdalene washes his feet with the ointment. Because Christ says, everywhere this will be told throughout the whole world. So the church really kept that. And they cut it out at the Palm Sunday Mass. All right, and then we left off on the last point. To sever any visible connection with the Holy Eucharist, the blessing of palms was no longer to be performed at the altar, but on a table separate from it. And that table also facing the people. Secondly, Pius XII's reform abolished the
Preface.
footnote. Read it, Anthony.
Part of the preface of the Blessing of Palms reads, quote, "For thee do thy creatures serve, because they know thee, their only author and God, and all the things that thou hast made join in praising thee. And thy saints bless thee, in that they confess with unfaltering voice before kings and powers of this world that great name, the name of thine only begotten Son."
Yeah, so what made the modernists go into a panic? What part of that preface?
The saints.
They like saints. They don't like them too much, but they're still in the Novus Ordo.
Before kings and powers of this world.
That's right. The social kingship of Christ, they can't stomach that. The reign of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, they cannot stomach that. So yes, which proclaim Christ's authority over all the kings and powers of this world, and the consequent duty of temporal governments to be subservient to Christ the King. Read on, Michael.
Which one, 39?
The elimination of this doctrine from the ancient rite can, at the very least, be regarded as an affront to Pius XII's immediate predecessor, who had promulgated the encyclical Quas Primas on the kingship of Christ in 1925. In that encyclical, Pope Pius XI reaffirmed the unbroken teaching of previous popes that nations, as well as individuals, must submit themselves to the rule of Christ the King.
Yes. Who here has never read that encyclical? Not read Quas Primas. Didn't we do it last year?
I don't remember.
Yeah, I do. Quas Primas. It's a very short encyclical, that's why. But it's a very powerful.
Oh, no, look at that.
Yeah, powerful and short. Read on.
Indeed, the significance of this omission goes way beyond the issue of simplification of the liturgy. It can be considered as the first step in the progressivist campaign to promote the sort of religious liberty that would later surface at Vatican II.
Yeah, the religious liberty that Bishop Fillet said was very limited, very limited. Well, heresy is not just very limited. The attacks against Christ the King at that level are not just very limited, and he knows that. 10 years later, in December 1956, Dignitatis Humanae, Vatican II's Declaration on Religious Liberty, also suppressed the traditional papal teaching on the social reign of Christ the King. So can you imagine that? An official document tearing the crown off of our divine Lord. That's why the Archbishop said they have uncrowned him. Go on, Michael.
And with the promulgation of that declaration, church leaders ceased to teach that all rulers and statesmen have an obligation to give public honor and obedience to Christ. This perennial teaching of the magisterium was rejected by Vatican II in order to open the church to the values of the modern world.
Footnote: the values of the modern world are now clearly apparent even in formerly Catholic countries today in the legalization of divorce, contraception, pornography, gay marriage, euthanasia, and abortion. Under the protection of Vatican II's repudiation of the reign of Christ the King over societies, an abortion clinic was opened in Rome during the papacy of who?
Paul VI.
Can you imagine that? In the 60s, they were having abortions in Rome, the holy city. He was reportedly upset, but could do nothing to prevent it without contradicting his own teaching on religious liberty and the separation of the church and state. He can thus be said to have presided over the spiritual and corporal destruction of his flock in his own diocese. Because what's the diocese of the Pope? Rome. In his own diocese was the first abortion clinic. And did he condemn it? Did he come out, having rosary processions in front of it to shut it down?
No.
Are you kidding? The social kingship of Christ marginalized. That's to put it very kindly, very softly. Read on, Anthony.
The reformers cut out some of the Palm Sunday antiphons traditionally sung during the procession. They inserted others from the modern Latin translation of the Psalms, rewritten by a committee of experts at the Pontifical Biblical Institute under the supervision of Cardinal Bea. This marked a complete break with tradition. Here we will deal only with one line, Psalm 46, verse 9, which became, in the Bea version, quote, Deus regnat super nationes. God reigns over the nations. The problem is that the Bea version, which is based on the Hebrew text, does not express the Christological context of the psalm, which was a prophecy about the future establishment of the church, when Christ would confer on her his spiritual authority over all individuals and nations. That is why the authentic Latin text found in the Vulgate, in the Vulgate Bible of St. Jerome, uses the future tense. Regnabit Deus super nationes. God will reign over the nations.
Yes. Well, actually, it's regnavit. Okay, I guess she does explain this later. All right. Regnavit. He reigns from the Regnavit Deus. Oh, that's Psalm 46. Okay. Psalm 95 says, Regnavit aligno Deus. God reigned from the tree. So this is Psalm 46, 9. Okay, so that's a little different. But the Bea version, Bea version, remember, Cardinal, Bishop, whatever, but Bea, he changed the Latin. Remember, I told you about that. He changed the Latin, and it's like throwing a wrench in the tires of a bike. Go on.
The Bea translation, which uses the present tense regnat, he reigns, is therefore a falsification of the Latin Vulgate, which has been handed down through liturgical use and interpreted by the fathers of the church. When we come to the Hebrew text, which was also divinely inspired, we see that it uses the perfect tense of the verb malak, reign. Although the perfect tense is normally associated with past events, In Hebrew, it is more wide-ranging and covers all time frames. Whether it embraces the past, present, or future is revealed from its context. Thus, for example, in Psalm 92, verse 1, whose context is the foundation of the world by God, Malak is translated with reference to the past. Dominus regnavit, the Lord hath reigned. But in another context, it may refer to a future event. Like many Old Testament prophecies, the Hebrew version of Psalm 46, verse 9, uses the so-called prophetic perfect tense to foretell a future event. In this context, the use of the future tense regnabit in the Latin Vulgate of the pre-1956 Missal is appropriate to illustrate the Old Testament prophecy of Christ's kingship when he would found the church in the New. Thus, the two testaments are seen as interrelated in a unified and coherent whole. As St. Augustine said, quote, "The New Testament lies hidden in the Old, and the Old is fulfilled in the New," end quote. But this meaning was not made clear in the 1956 Reform, as the Bea translation took advantage of the Hebrew system to interpolate a different meaning into Psalm 46, verse 9.
Yes. Background to the mistranslation. Gabriel?
There can be no doubt that Father Bea understood the new meaning as being favorable for ecumenism, for ecumenical and interfaith purposes, that is, for the promotion of religious liberty. As rector of the Pontifical Biblical Institute, he took the unprecedented and hitherto forbidden step of participating in an Old Testament Congress in Göttingen in 1935, which had been organized by Protestant, Jewish, and secular biblical scholars.
Footnote, because he was a German, Cardinal Bea and the origins of Roman Catholic engagement in the ecumenical movement. This information was previously provided by Father Yves Congar from a conversation with Cardinal Bea as recorded in Congar's My Journal of the Council. 258. Okay, well, read on.
He must therefore have knowingly changed the translation to make it acceptable to those who refuse to recognize the reign of Christ the King over all peoples and states. It was precisely this teaching that the Reformers cut out of the Palm Sunday liturgy, first from the preface of the Blessing of the Palms, and secondly from Psalm 46, which is itself a completely new insert. It is noteworthy that the Bea version is reproduced in the Editio Typica of the 1962 Missal, promulgated by the Sacred Congregation of Rites on June the 23rd of that year. Curiously, with the exception of Baronius Press, which has reproduced the 1962 Missal in strict accordance with the Editio Typica, other traditionalist publishers have changed regnat back to regnabit.
Yeah, from present tense to future tense. Ironically, go on.
Ironically, Pius XII has stated in Mediator Dei, paragraph 6, quote, "Only a short while previously, with the design of rendering the prayers of the liturgy more correctly understood, and their truth and unction more easy to perceive, we arranged to have the Book of Psalms, which forms such an important part of these prayers in the Catholic Church, translated again into Latin from their original text." End quote.
Yes, so that was the Bea waste of time, the Bea Psalms. So it was unbelievable waste of time. I just can't believe Pius XII allowed himself to be committed to such a waste of time. And the Psalms, going away from the Latin Vulgate to this new translation, it doesn't flow. Priests were very agitated and irritated by it. And it was just, I can't believe he wasted hours and hours on this waste of time. But again, I think he lost a lot of grace because he didn't do what?
Consecrate Russia to the neck of the heart.
I really am convinced that's why he made all these big mistakes. Read on.
The preface of the pre-1956 Blessing of Palms shows the importance of this teaching to our age by revealing the theological foundation of the duty of temporal governments to be subservient to Christ the King. It was this teaching that the 1956 reformers excised from the liturgy of Palm Sunday, as they also did from the Good Friday liturgy with the abolition of the hymn Vexilla Regis.
Yes. Vexilla Regis pro Deus. The standard, the banner of the king, the cross, comes forth. And it says, he who, life having been killed on the tree, gave us life. So that's removed in the Good Friday liturgy as well. What time is that sung?
The Blessed Sacrament's being brought back from the altar of repose into the sanctuary.
Yes, from the altar of reservation or repose to the main altar. Go on.
Where the suppression of the traditional doctrine in the 1956 liturgy was leading has become quite clear with the benefit of hindsight. Cardinal Bea's influence on the documents of Vatican II concerning the Church's relationship with other faiths was decisive. Paul VI would undermine the traditional teaching on the kingship of Christ with his motu proprio Mysterii Paschalis in 1969. Whereas Pius XI had called on all nations to declare Christ as their king here and now, Paul VI gave a different message: abandon any prospect of the social kingship of Christ until the end of the world.
Footnote: in this motu proprio, Paul VI changed the date of the feast of Christ the King, which was set by Pius XI on the Sunday before All Saints' Day, usually the last Sunday of October. He changed it to the last Sunday of the ecclesiastical year with the intention that the, quote, eschatological importance of this Sunday is made clearer. Thus he, Paul VI, gave the faithful to understand that Christ will become king of the universe only after a long process, that is, at the end of the world. Which is also why Bonini put the Mysterium Fidei, gutted it from the words of consecration of the precious blood to the end of the "Let us proclaim the mystery of faith. Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again." Right? So they put the mystery of Christ
Not being the Eucharist, but being him coming at the end.
At the end of the world, yes. Very subtle, but very dangerous. Go on.
This is in line with Vatican II's teaching on religious liberty. For progressivists, the kingship of Christ is acceptable so long as its realization does not impinge on the political and social order of modern states, or on the Church's mission to convert all nations, Christianize their cultures, and influence their laws. But this is tantamount to banishing Christ from the public square. And people wonder why the Church's missionary spirit has been extinguished.
Yes, right. Betrayed from the Pope and bishops down. The ancient rite of blessing the palms abolished. Michael?
Of the 7 traditional prayers for the blessing of the palms, Pius XII's commission abolished all except one, thereby expunging from the Holy Week liturgy a vital expression of the Church's doctrine on the efficacy of sacramentals. According to Dom Prosper Gouranger, the blessing of the palms imparts a virtue to these branches and elevates them to the supernatural order. Thus they become a means for the sanctification of our souls and a protection of our persons and dwellings. In these prayers, the springs of palm or olive, after they are blessed, are called a sacramentum, a sacred sign, and a saving remedy, signifying God's protection of soul and body. God is further entreated that all who receive them in the spirit of faith and keep them in their homes may receive his blessing and protection, and that through their use, the right hand of God may dispel all evil.
Yes, so many families put the palms behind the crucifix on the wall. They bring it into their homes. And with the traditional blessing, it's pretty powerful. It drives away the devil, it brings bound graces, and so forth. Go on.
This is the clearest possible liturgical expression of the Church's teaching, that the blessed palms, when used with a pious intention, are carriers of God's grace to man. But the 1956 reformers, in their desire to bury this doctrine, used the following strawman argument to eliminate any mention of it in the liturgy. Quote, "These pious customs of the blessed palms, although theologically justified, can degenerate, as in fact they have degenerated, into superstition," end quote.
So that's what they think of the sacramentals, superstition, the modernists. And then finish.
In spite of the fact that the liturgy neither comes from nor leads to superstition, that was their crass justification for desacralizing the Palm Sunday rite of blessing by divesting the prayers of their supernatural status.
A creeping naturalism. Cutting these prayers out of the liturgy was bound to weaken any real sense of the significance of the supernatural in the lives of the faithful. The history of the liturgical reform has shown that this was just the start of a trend, culminating in the Novus Ordo Mass, in which the supernatural was steadily being peeled away. It is no wonder that belief in the Church as the mediator of divine grace has long since faded. Quite predictably, the work of Pius XII's commission gave rise to a vicious circle within the Church, for the temptation that followed the 56 reform, into which many have since yielded, was to reinterpret faith and morals to suit the prevailing secularization of the liturgy. Old Testament symbolism discarded. Anthony.
We cannot but deplore the disappearance of the rich symbolism in the Palm Sunday liturgy, which carries deep theological meaning. The traditional prayers mention a range of people and events in the Old Testament and show their connection with Christ's redeeming work, thus revealing the spiritual and mystical significance of the entire Holy Week. They present Moses, Aaron, the Israelites, Noah, and the ark as types or shadows prefiguring some aspect of God's plan of salvation fulfilled in the New Testament. Liberation from the bondage of sin, the peace of God heralded by the dove carrying the olive branch, the ark as the figure of the church. Even the humble branches of palm and olive are mentioned in these prayers, the former as signifying Christ's victory over the prince of death, the latter as prefiguring spiritual unction, sacramental grace, through Christ.
Footnote, and by extension, the palm is a symbol of victory against the enemies of the soul in the war waged by the Spirit against the flesh. A doctrinal point very much out of favor in the modern liturgy. Read on.
All of this typology was removed in 1956, reducing the blessing of the palms to a perfunctory one prayer service displaying none of the scriptural depth, poetic beauty, or mystical significance of the traditional rite. Cardinal Wiseman described these prayers of blessing as rich in poetry and dramatic appeal, and said that they, quote, possess an elevation of sentiment, a force of expression, and a depth of feeling which no modern form of supplication ever exhibits, end quote. He was, however, only one, albeit the most eloquent, among the countless Catholic souls who appreciated and were moved by these prayers before their relegation to the dustbin of history.
Yeah, so these prayers we keep, and they are very beautiful. And to the average Joe who's in the pew, they don't have time to be going through classes in the seminary and studying the fathers and the doctrines of the church. They're trying to survive to support their family. But if they get Holy Week off, which for centuries most workmen got off, then they get a refresher that all the Old Testament points to Christ. Everything is for him, for his glory. And it always just strengthens the faith. Plus the powerful symbolism, right? The powerful symbolism. And then the chanting of the Passion. And again, at the end of the Passion, they dropped one of the most beautiful melodies ever. Et corpus Jesu. That's the melody. I'm not getting the words right, but that's the melody. And it's just, that was dropped too in the 62. It was 55. Did you know that? It was dropped. Everything was truncated to shorten it. But Archbishop Lefebvre kept it, and all through our seminary we kept it. So that is a pre-55 part that they cut off. An ancient and much loved ceremony abandoned. Gabriel?
One of the most popular and memorable traditions in the unreformed Palm Sunday ceremonies took place after the distribution of the palms and was performed by the subdeacon who led the procession while carrying the veiled crucifix. After the clergy and faithful had processed outside the church to the sound of antiphons sung by the choir, the door was closed. They could only regain admittance after the subdeacon had struck the door 3 times with the foot of the cross. For those participating in the procession, this dramatic gesture carried deep theological meaning. It was a particularly vivid symbol signifying Christ's opening the gates of the New Jerusalem by his death upon the cross and leading the faithful to their heavenly goal. Who could fail to understand or be impressed by the doctrinal significance of this simple gesture? Yet it was cast aside by the reformers as a worthless relic of the past, instead of being cherished and transmitted to posterity as an inheritance from our forefathers in the faith.
Yes, so they trashed that very powerful gesture. Even for children who are in the ceremony, they see the cross, they see the subdeacon or the acolyte bang it against the front door of the church, and then the procession in. It's all powerful, very powerful, and they just chuck it. The reading of the Passion curtailed. Here we go. In the 1956 Reform and consequently in the 1962 Missal, the Passion of St. Matthew is considerably shortened by the deliberate omission of 2 key elements. 1, the institution of the Eucharist, and 2, the guarding of the tomb of Jesus. As regards the former, the Church included it on Palm Sunday and other days of Holy Week in order to make a doctrinal point unmistakably clear: that there is an essential bond between the Holy Eucharist and the Passion. Or in the words of St. Thomas Aquinas, the Eucharist is the perfect sacrament of our Lord's Passion, as containing Christ crucified. Tertia Pars, question 73, article 5 of the Summa. Again, the Holy Eucharist is the perfect sacrament of our Lord's Passion, as containing Christ crucified. The omission of what the Church had considered vital to our understanding of the Holy Eucharist undermines the coherence of the entire Holy Week liturgy. As for St. Matthew's account of the guarded tomb, also omitted in the 56, its excision from the Palm Sunday liturgy was seriously detrimental to the Church for 2 reasons. First, it furnished incontrovertible proof of the reality of Christ's resurrection, while at the same time exposing the malice of the Jews who continued their persecution of him even beyond his death. Right? Footnote. Read the footnote, Anthony.
In Matthew 62:66 we read, quote, "The chief priests and the Pharisees came together to Pilate, saying, 'Sir, we have remembered that the seducer said, while he was yet alive, after 3 days I will rise again. Command, therefore, the sepulchre to be guarded until the 3rd day, lest perhaps his disciples come and steal him away, and say to the people, He has risen from the dead, and the last error shall be worse than the first.' Pilate said to them, 'You have a guard. Go. guarded as you know, and they, departing, made the sepulchre sure, sealing the stone and setting the guards, end quote. St. Augustine saw the illogicality of the Jewish lobby and asked, if the guard was awake, how could the theft succeed? And if the guards were asleep, how could they identify the disciples as the thieves? In this passage, St. Matthew brought out the subtle irony, the workings of divine providence, regarding the attempts by the Jews to prevent the resurrection from taking place. For the more precautions they took, humanly speaking, to seal and guard the tomb, the more they confirmed the truth of the resurrection as a supernatural event to the whole world. And so they were hoist on their own petard, for it was their credibility that was damaged while belief in the resurrection was strengthened by their very attempts to suppress it.
Yes, very, very well explained. Very well explained. Secondly, so first, proof of his resurrection and the hatred of the Jews, their malice. Secondly, as St. Matthew was the only one of the four evangelists to mention the guarding of the tomb. To expunge this passage meant that it would no longer have any place in the entire Roman Missal. It was just another case of the liturgical movement's memory holes swallowing up unwanted doctrinal facts and erasing them from the official records. Read on, Michael.
We have seen some, but by no means all, of the depredations inflicted on the Palm Sunday liturgy, which became operative in 1956, and have noted that they were undertaken at the expense of authentic Catholic values, doctrinal integrity, poetic beauty, and appreciation of the Church's past achievements. History has indeed shown that these reforms were not only the tip of the iceberg of an unrestrained pillaging and ransacking of the ancient Holy Week rite, but they were also the first step in a deliberate attempt to demolish our common heritage and usher in an entirely new kind of liturgy, one which has not advanced the cause of Catholicism. It was a painful record of humiliation, defeat, and loss for all the bishops, priests, and lay people who protested to the Holy See at the time. They were simply left to rail in impotent anger. Given the historical evidence, we are entitled to conclude that, in spite of protestations of good intentions by the liturgist, the reformers involved either in indifference to the nature of Catholic tradition or a desire to eradicate it.
Yeah, more like eradicate it, as we see happening. Chapter 12, Palm Sunday, 1956, the cult of novelty. One innovation begets another, which begets another. Anthony?
It is only when the details are examined that the revolutionary nature of the reforms becomes apparent. Now we shall see what new ideas were dreamt up by the reformers to replace what they had managed to purloin from the universal church with the complicity of Pius XII. The foremost issue was the active participation of the people, as Father Frederick McManus, a major figure in the reform, explained as soon as the new Holy Week Ordo was issued in 1956, quote, "The rubrics of the Ordo refer constantly to the responses to be made by the members of the congregation and to their activity in the carrying out of the Holy Liturgy. This is, of course, a notable departure from the rubrical norms of the Roman Missal," end quote. What is even more revolutionary is that responsibility for carrying out the liturgy now falls, by papal diktat, and for the first time in the Church's history, on the shoulders of the laity. Their active participation is, quote, "made a matter of rubrical law and incorporated into the very text of the new liturgical book," end quote. But when has the Roman Missal ever laid down rules to regulate how the faithful should respond during the liturgy? Even Father McManus had to admit that the traditional Missal was silent on the matter of lay participation. Traditionally, it was the responsibility of the celebrant, not the laity, to read the black and do the red as printed in the Missal, under pain of penalty.
Yeah, read the black, which was the prayers in black ink, and then do the red, which are the rubrics explained in the red ink in the Missal. Nowhere was, yeah, that's true, nowhere does it give any instructions to the faithful. Go on.
There were also detailed instructions of the missal for other ministers in the sanctuary in their respective roles, but none for the laity because they were not regarded as having a liturgical role to play.
That's right. That's correct. Go on.
But the liturgical reform, on the other hand, made it incumbent on the laity to give their responses and contribute actively to the performance of the liturgy. Pius XII simply introduced this ruling to please the reformers. The impression was given that anyone praying silently in the pews during liturgical ceremonies would be guilty of breaking a law laid down by the Pope. This revolutionary view was reinforced in the general instruction of the Novus Ordo liturgy, where it is stated that the faithful have a duty, paragraph 18, to become actively involved in the liturgy, and they must not refuse to do so. Quote, "The faithful, moreover, should not refuse to serve the people of God in gladness whenever they are asked to perform some particular service or function in the celebration," end quote, paragraph 97.
Yeah, so reading the epistle, swinging their arms, singing, goofy music, and communion, giving Holy Communion.
Bringing up the gifts.
Gifts, yeah. Did I miss anything? Oh, the ministers of hospitality. Yeah, they got to be there to greet everybody as they come into the church and say goodbye to them on their way out. The cult of novelty in the Palm Sunday liturgy. Gabriel?
The 1956 and 1962 Palm Sunday liturgy opens with a visual and, literally, shocking reversal of traditional practice. In order to reinforce the quote-unquote community celebration aspect, a portable table is set up in the sanctuary. The palms are laid on it, and the priest blesses them in full view of the people, in conspectu populi, while all the while with his back to the altar and the Blessed Sacrament. Reversing centuries of liturgical tradition, the 1956 Ordo of Palm Sunday mandated that the priest or deacon should conduct an audible dialogue with the people while facing them. After the opening antiphon is sung, the celebrant, facing the people from behind the table, says Dominus vobiscum, to which all respond, et cum spiritu tuo. This took place at various points before the blessing of the palms, both before and after the procession, before the gospel, and at the Orate Fratres, where all the people are supposed to respond aloud. But in the traditional rite, the priest remains at the altar and is specifically instructed not to turn to the people, non vertens se ad populum. During this exchange, the response is given by another minister in the sanctuary. Before the procession in the Reformed rite, the deacon, facing the people, says, "Procedamos in pace," let us go forth in peace, and the people respond, "In nomine Christi," or in the name of Christ. This contrasts with the traditional missal, which instructs only the choir, not the people, to sing the response. At the end of the procession, a new prayer was inserted, which is said by the celebrant while facing the people, and requires the response Amen from them. Ironically, the procession in honor of Christ the King was revamped to exalt the role of the people in the liturgy. Now that the supernatural significance of the subdeacon's role was eliminated, the way was open to enlarging the role of the laity. Whereas in the traditional missal, the singing of the liturgy was the function of the priest and cantors alternating with the choir, as stipulated by Pope Pius X. In the new Ordo, this suddenly became the responsibility of all. The rubrics of the 1956 Ordo and the 1962 Missal indicate the parts to be sung by the choir and by the people. But the rationale for this can be seen in the spirit of rivalry on which it was based. Father McManus explained the thinking behind this reform. Quote, "When a choir chants those parts of Holy Mass or other rites which belong to the people, the faithful are not doing what they are appointed by. The faithful are not doing what they are appointed by their baptismal character to do, namely, worship God as members of Christ, and the restored Holy Week, the clear directions indicate again and again that the people should not be denied this right. End quote.
All right, we'll stop there and pick up next time. Agitorium nostrum in nomine Domini.
Pretty good, just take it back to the house.
Yeah, that's a hard.